Welcome to the Project Asia Bundaberg podcast, brought to you by Bundaberg Tourism. I'm Craig Shim from Alphacrane Intercultural Specialists. Attracting Asian visitors to Bundaberg is clearly great for the local economy, but what does it mean for your business if you start receiving guests or customers who don't appear to speak much or any English? Does it mean you'll lose a potentially lucrative customer? Possibly, yes. In this episode, I'll share with you some simple tips for overcoming language barriers with your Asian visitors who may not be fluent in English. Before we go through these tips, if you have something you'd like answered on this podcast, please contact myself or the team at Bundaberg Tourism, as we're always looking for practical challenges to address and share with our Bundaberg Tourism operators. After all, we don't know what we don't know, and that's what I'm here for, to help you better understand the mindset of the Asian visitor from a cultural perspective, so that your business can benefit from this growing market. Now, on to the podcast. So, you don't speak the same language as your Asian customer and they don't speak English? No problem. Here are my 3 tips. Tip number 1 is about simple English. Many Asian visitors who may not appear to speak English can actually read basic English. Make it easy for them by displaying product descriptions using simple English that is unlikely to be mistranslated. Furthermore, include prices on all of your displays to avoid confusion. Here's a cultural insight into why this helps. Saving face is important in Asian cultures. If your guest isn't confident at conversing in English, they may avoid asking questions to save face. This avoids the embarrassment of not being able to speak English fluently or not being able to understand your accent. That's why it's important for you to provide as much written information as possible, either via your signage for your product descriptions or via a QR code linked to your content on your website, your Instagram, or Facebook page. Tip number 2. This is about verbal communication using old school technology. Here's the tip. Keep a notepad and paper handy for when English isn't spoken fluently by your guest. They'll probably read at least some English, so during your conversations, write down key words to help them understand, and vice versa. When they are explaining things to you or asking you questions, you can write down keywords just so that they can confirm that they are being properly understood. Tip number 3 is to use an instant translation app. A better option for communicating with guests from China is to download the WeChat app on your mobile phone and use that for instant translation. And of course, for other languages, Google Translate is always your friend. But let me explain a little bit more about using WeChat for instantly translating conversations with Chinese-speaking customers. If your customer speaks Chinese, more than likely they'll be relying on the WeChat app for messaging and translating. Furthermore, if they're from China, they'll be using WeChat for searching, booking, and paying for products and services. But keep in mind that your visitors from China would not have access to the Google suite of products, such as Google Translate, except when they're overseas. In other words, they may not really be familiar or comfortable in using Google Translate or other Google products. Therefore, you're better off using a platform they're already comfortable with, in other words, WeChat, rather than expecting them to use Google Translate. Furthermore, the translations from WeChat are far superior to Google Translate, and I know this from first-hand experience being in China. Why should you learn to use WeChat and its translation function? Because when you offer to communicate with your customer on their terms, that is, using the WeChat app if they're from China, they will feel appreciated and they will recognize that you've made an effort to accommodate their language preferences, even though you don't necessarily speak their language. Of course, not all Chinese people are from China, so be prepared to use Google Translate or another similar app if your Asian customer looks confused or declines your offer to use WeChat Translate. If you're unsure what language your customer speaks, just say WeChat, followed by Google Translate, and judge from their reaction which option they prefer. So that brings us to the end of this episode. If you have a challenging question you'd like answered in our next episode, simply make a short voice recording and send it to me as an MMS to my mobile phone or send it as an email attachment. My number is 0481 387 625 and my email is craig@alphacrane.com.au. And of course, alternatively, you can send it to the friendly team over at Bundaberg Tourism. Madison Clark is the person to look for. I hope you enjoyed this episode and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next podcast. Project Asia is a 5-year program to develop Asian cultural capabilities of Bundaberg Tourism operators. Project Asia is commissioned by Bundaberg Tourism. This podcast is produced by Craig Shim from Alphacrane Intercultural Specialists. Thanks for listening.